All right, welcome everybody. This is a very short video, just wanting to describe and help you out a bit with the Looperator. All right, first things first, let me just make sure you can see Eclipse here. Very good. So this is our program and the way that I want it to work. I'll just run it. So we need to input an integer from 1 to 100, which means anything less than 1, so like -3. Right, returns that's not between 1 and 100, and we ask them again. So we'll try 0. And once again, that's not between 100, 1 and 100. So we tell them that, and then we repeat till finally we do the number 8, and there we go. Okay, so once we do find a valid input, then we need to find all the factors of that. Right, so all the factors of 8 are 1, 2, 4, and 8. And we find all the multiples of 8 all the way up until 100. So notice it doesn't continue past 96. All right, some other things. So notice also that there's commas after most of the numbers, but on the last number, there's no comma. So there's something very subtle that we need to do there as well to ensure there's no comma at the back. All right, so it seems complicated. I'll give you a little shot of the code as well. So you'll notice that it's broken down into 3 methods. The getNum method, which deals with the inputs, the factoring method, and the multiples method. Okay, and if you notice in the main method here, it's very clean and simple now that we have the other methods, right? We use the getNum to get the user's inputs. And then we have an output statement that says the factors are, and then we run the factor method, and same thing with the multiples. All right, so let's take a look at the pseudocode for this. And remember, the pseudocode can be found on Edsby underneath the instructions here. So I'll just give a brief overview. This pseudocode pretty much describes the flow, but just to describe it a bit. So remember, for the input method, right, and this is very similar to the quiz, right? We're asking the user for their number, and we're putting a while loop, right? We're putting a while loop, so we basically want to keep asking them to input a number if user num happens to be less than 1, or if user num happens to be greater than 100. Right, so if you have a number like 200, it'll just keep repeating until they give us a proper or a correct number, and that will break out of the while loop. Okay, also keep in mind, so this one will be an integer return type, and it's going to return a num variable. Okay, so that handles the input method. For the factoring method, so this is what the output looks like. And basically, to find out if something is a factor of a number, we need to divide it. Right, and if there's no remainders, then that is a factor. Okay, so if you look at how the math works, so what we'll do is we'll take the input number, in this case it's 8, and we're using the remainder division. So if we divide by 1, right, 8 divided by 1 has no remainder, so the answer is 0. Therefore, we know it's a factor, and that gets listed. Right, then we increase that number, so 8 divided by 2, no remainders, so we know it's a factor. So increase that number again, 8 divided by 3. This time there is a remainder, it equals to 1, so we know it's not a factor. Okay, so that's how the math works. Now the way to actually program that is we need to use a for loop. Okay, so from here, we set up a basic for loop. We have our counter here, which we'll call factor, set that to 1. We're going to run this for loop as long as factor is less than or equal to the user num. User num is 8 in this case. And we're going to increase factor by 1 after each iteration or pass through. Okay, then from there, we have an if statement, and this one checks if there are any remainders, right? If there's no remainder, then we're going to print that out because it is a factor. Okay, so remember this if statement, if user num divided by factor gives you no remainders, and if factor is less than user num, then we'll operate that. So here's the thing, notice how there's a comma back here. So that's what, if we go up here, those are all of these commas. Sorry, there shouldn't be a comma after the 8. Going down, so once the user num does equal the factor, then we're just going to print out the factor because we know we've reached the end of the line. Okay, so like I said, I'm going pretty fast with these. Let me know in class or message me on Edsby if you want any more explanations. All right, the multiples method. So multiple is a number, right? The multiples of our number are numbers starting from 1 that get multiplied to our input. All right, so like say, for example, our input number was 7. We'd first multiply 7 times 1, 7 times 2, and etc. all the way up until the product would be greater than 100. All right, so for this one, we're going to do 2 for loops. The first for loop is we're going to count how many multiples there are until we reach 100. All right, so we'll count those multiples. Reason being is because once again, on the output, like we have at the bottom here, we need to know how many multiples there are so that we know when to stop and we don't put a comma at the end of that number. Okay, so this first one, this for loop, so counter starts at 1 and then run as long as counter times user num is less than or equal to 100 and counter plus plus increases this. Okay, so that should give us our number, excuse me, should give us how many are, we're using a counter to tell us how many multiples there are. Okay, the second for loop here, this one actually does the multiplication up until the second last one. And the reason being, so we've created a new variable, multiples, that's equal to 1. And we want this for loop to run as long as multiples is less than counter minus 1, right? Because we don't want that last one to print. All right, so keep going through. After that, within that for loop, we can multiply multiple times user num and the comma. And then for this last one, that one's just going to be multiple times user num. If multiple times user num is less than 100, you probably don't even need this complex if statement. Then you multiply multiple times user num, no comma, and that's how it ends. All right, in the main method, so as we showed before, and similar to the quiz, so you're going to have a return type for that input method. You can save that to a variable, and I'll show you what that looks like up here. Save that to a variable. And in this variable, then you can pass into the parameters of the factor and multiple methods. Okay, and then those get called. Those are run these methods here. And that pretty much describes how this program will work. All right, so once again, I know that was pretty fast, but try that out. Let me know if you guys have any questions in class. All right, take care for now.